The sun beat down on Redemption, Arizona, a town barely more than a collection of dusty shacks and dreams. It was 1880, and the air was thick with heat and a hushed kind of sadness. Everyone in town had gathered, their faces grim, beneath the makeshift gallows. Marshal Thorne, a man with a jaw like granite and eyes that saw too much, stood ready. Below the hangman's noose, Silas, an outlaw with a tangled beard and fear in his eyes, stood shackled. But it wasn't Silas who held Emily's gaze. It was the rough, splintered wood of the gallows itself, and the tight knot of the rope. Her heart felt like a trapped bird, beating wildly against her ribs. Beside her, their small daughter, Lily, clutched Emily's faded skirt, too young to understand the heavy quiet, but old enough to feel her mother's terror. Emily watched, numb, as Marshal Thorne spoke the final words. The trapdoor creaked open with a sickening groan. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as Silas dropped. A shadow fell across Emily's soul, cold and deep. He was gone. Her husband, Silas, the man she had loved despite his wild ways, was gone. The crowd began to stir, a low murmur replacing the silence. Emily felt their eyes on her, heavy and judging. She was no longer just Emily. She was the outlaw's widow. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, stealing her breath. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear into the vast, unforgiving desert. Lily, startled by the sudden movement in the crowd, whimpered and buried her face in Emily's side. Emily wrapped her arm tightly around her daughter, her only comfort in a world that had just shattered. She looked up, her gaze meeting Marshal Thorne's across the clearing. His expression was unyielding, a clear message in his stern eyes. Asterisk, you are stained by this. Star. The townsfolk, who had once offered a nod or a polite word, now averted their eyes or stared with thinly veiled disgust. Emily knew what they were thinking. An outlaw's wife, a criminal's widow. She was no longer one of them. The dust of redemption, which had always felt like home, now felt like a curse, clinging to her skin, marking her as an outcast. The future stretched before her, empty and terrifying. How would she and Lily survive, branded by such a terrible shame? The knot in her stomach tightened. She was alone. The rope creaked, a terrible sound that echoed in Emily's ears long after Silas's body had been cut down. The crowd, a moment ago a single judging eye, now began to break apart, scattering like dust motes in the wind. They left behind a lingering silence, thick with unspoken words and accusations. Emily still held Lily close, her own body rigid with shock and fear. She wanted to slip away unnoticed, to vanish from the place where her life had just ended. But Marshal Thorne, his face carved from old wood, stepped forward. His boots crunched on the dry earth, a sound that seemed to thunder in the sudden quiet. He stopped directly in front of Emily, his shadow falling over her and Lily. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, held no pity. Emily, his voice was rough, like gravel tumbling down a dry creek bed. Your husband was an outlaw, a thief and a danger to this town. Emily flinched, pulling Lily even closer. He was my husband, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Marshal Thorne ignored her plea. You were his wife. That makes you tainted, too. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her worn dress, her tired face. This town has no room for the wife of a criminal. No room for a criminal's widow. The word struck Emily like a physical blow. Asterisk criminal's widow. Asterisk the phrase hung in the air, a brand seared onto her very being. It was official now, not just a whispered thought in the minds of the townsfolk, but a decree from the law itself. You need to leave, Emily. The marshal continued, his voice flat and final. Take your daughter and be gone from Redemption by sunup tomorrow. If you're still here, you'll be treated as a vagrant or worse. Lily, sensing the harshness in the marshal's voice, let a small cry and buried her head deeper into Emily's chest. Emily's arms tightened around her daughter, her heart a leaden weight. Leave? Where could they go? They had no money, no other family, no place in this vast, unforgiving land. Every door in redemption had already slammed shut in her face. Their former home, now just a memory tainted by Silas's deeds. The marshal turned and walked away, his broad back disappearing into the gathering dusk. Emily stood there, rooted to the spot, the weight of his words crushing her. Cast out, banished. She was not just grieving a husband, she was losing everything. The setting sun painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, beautiful but mocking. It promised a new day, but for Emily, it only promised a lonely road and an uncertain, terrifying future. The dust swirled around her feet, a silent witness to her ruin. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks that seemed to mock Emily's cold despair. Marshal Thorne's words, "Be gone by sunup," echoed in her mind, a cruel bell tolling her ruin. She clutched Lily's small hand, walking numbly through the darkening streets of redemption. Every flicker of lamplight from a window, every distant laugh, felt like a stab. This was no longer her home. She tried the general store, hoping for a crust of bread on credit, or even a kind word from old Mr. Henderson. He peered at her over his spectacles, his usual friendly face now tight with disapproval. "Can't help you, Emily," he mumbled, looking away. "Business is business. And, well, he didn't need to say more. The brand of criminal's widow was already visible, invisible to the eye but clear to all. Next, she approached Mrs. Gable, a woman who had once traded recipes with her. Mrs. Gable quickly pulled her curtains shut. The message was clear: no charity, no comfort, no help for the tainted. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. Even the few coins Silas had left her were gone, taken by the marshal as part of restitution. She had nothing but the clothes on their backs and a gnawing fear in her gut. Lily, tired and confused, began to sniffle. "Mama, I'm hungry." And cold. Emily hugged her tight, tears pricking her own eyes. "Soon, little bird. Soon." But she didn't know how soon or where. The thought of sleeping in the open desert with Lily, exposed to the night's chill and its unseen dangers, made her shiver. They wandered to the edge of town, where the last shack gave way to the vast, empty scrubland. Emily sat on a worn-out barrel, pulling Lily onto her lap. The stars began to pepper the inky sky, bright and indifferent. Despair, a heavy blanket, settled over Emily. It wasn't just fear for herself, but a profound anguish for Lily. Her daughter deserved more than this cold, hungry night. She deserved a future, a home, a chance. But Emily felt utterly helpless, stripped of dignity and hope. She looked back at redemption, its lights twinkling like distant, mocking eyes. Every path was blocked. Every door was closed. She had been cast out truly and completely. A tear traced a path down her dusty cheek, a silent testament to the ruin that now engulfed her. She was adrift, a tiny boat in a vast, uncaring ocean. As Emily huddled with Lily on the outskirts of redemption, feeling the cold bite of the desert night, a pair of eyes watched from the shadows of the general store. Jacob, a man built like a sturdy oak tree with a quiet strength about him, had seen everything. He'd seen Silas on the gallows, seen Emily's face crumple, and heard Marshal Thorne's harsh decree. He'd also seen the closed doors and averted gazes of the town. Jacob was not one to involve himself in town gossip or public dramas. He preferred the solitude of his small ranch outside of town, working his land with a steady hand. But today the events had pulled at something deep inside him. He hadn't just been a witness to Silas's hanging. He had been the reason for it. A few weeks prior, Silas and his gang had ridden into redemption, wild with whiskey and a thirst for trouble. They'd tried to rob the bank, and when the bank teller, a young man named Billy, had tried to resist, Silas had raised his pistol. Jacob, who had been buying supplies, had seen the danger. Without thinking, he'd drawn his own old rifle and fired. His shot had struck Silas, wounding him badly enough for Marshal Thorne to capture him. It had been a clean shot, a necessary one to save Billy's life and stop the robbery. The town had called him a hero. But watching Emily now, a small figure huddled against the cold with a child, Jacob felt no heroism. only a heavy, aching guilt. He hadn't known Silas had a wife and a little girl. He hadn't thought about the ripples his actions would cause, the innocent lives that would be caught in the undertow. He had saved a life, yes, but he had also, in a way, destroyed another. Emily's despair was a direct result of his bullet. He watched her pull her threadbare shawl tighter around Lily, saw the tremble in her shoulders, even from a distance. The moon rose, casting long, stark shadows across the empty land. He knew no one in town would offer her shelter. They were too afraid of the Marshal's word, too quick to judge. Jacob pushed himself away from the wall, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. He wasn't a man of many words, but he couldn't stand by and watch this. He had taken something from her, even if it was a life that deserved to be taken. Now he felt a deep, quiet need to give something back, to ease the burden he had unknowingly placed upon her. The guilt was a heavy stone in his gut, urging him forward into the cold night. Emily huddled closer to Lily, the desert night growing colder around them. The silence was broken only by the distant howl of a coyote, a lonely sound that mirrored the ache in her heart. She wondered if this was how they would spend the night, shivering under the vast, uncaring sky. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness. Emily's breath hitched in her throat. Her hand instinctively went to Lily's head, pulling her closer still. Was it a drifter? A danger? A man stepped into the faint moonlight, his silhouette tall and broad. It was Jacob, the quiet rancher who rarely came to town except for supplies. Emily knew him only by sight, a man of few words but known for his steady nature. He stopped a few feet away, his presence calming the initial fear but raising a new wave of confusion. Why was he here? Emily. Jacob's voice was low, a rumbling sound that seemed to carry the weight of the night. He wasn't looking at her face, but at the ground, then out at the empty desert. You can't stay out here. It's too cold for the child. Emily didn't know what to say. No one else had offered even a glance of pity. We have nowhere to go, she admitted, her voice cracking. The shame of her situation burned, even in the dark. Jacob finally met her gaze, his eyes a deep, troubled blue. I have a small cabin on my land, a bit of a ride from here. It's empty. You and Lily could stay there. It's not much, but it's shelter. Emily stared at him, disbelief warring with a flicker of desperate hope. A cabin? Shelter? It felt like a mirage in the desert of her despair. Why? She managed to ask, suspicious. Kindness was a rare thing in redemption, especially for her. Jacob shifted his weight, his gaze returning to the ground. Everyone deserves a roof over their head. And I could use some help on the ranch. Light work, feeding the chickens, tending a small garden. Something to earn your keep. The offer was plain, no strings, no judgment in his voice. It was a lifeline. Emily considered it for only a moment. Her pride was a small thing compared to Lily's warmth and safety. Yes, she said, the word a desperate gasp of relief. Yes, please. We'll help in any way we can. Jacob nodded, a subtle movement. Good. I'll get my wagon. It's too far to walk. He turned and disappeared back into the darkness. Emily watched him go, a strange mix of relief and bewilderment swirling inside her. A chance. A tiny, unexpected chance in the wilderness of her ruin. Cobb's wagon was a rumble of hope in the darkness. They rode in silence, the only sounds the creak of the wheels and the vast, empty whisper of the desert wind. The small cabin, nestled among some scrub brush a good distance from Redemption, was indeed simple. A single room, a dirt floor, and a small, cracked window. But to Emily, it felt like a palace. It had a roof for walls and a small, rough bed. The first few weeks were a blur of exhaustion. Emily quickly learned that light work on a ranch was still hard work for a woman used to a town dwelling. Her hands, once soft, soon became calloused and rough from feeding chickens, gathering eggs, and hauling water from the well. She learned to mend fences with wire and pliers, and to coax vegetables from the dry, stubborn earth of a small garden patch. The sun beat down relentlessly, and her muscles ached every night. Lily, too, found the change difficult. She missed the few children she had known in town, and the cabin, though safe, felt lonely. Emily tried to keep her spirits up, inventing games with smooth stones and telling stories by the flickering lamplight. Every few days, Jacob would ride over, silently checking on their progress. He would leave bags of flour, beans, and cured meat, sometimes a small treat for Lily, like a dried apple. He rarely spoke more than a few words, always about the work, the weather, or Lily's health. Emily felt a strange mix of gratitude and discomfort. He was kind, yes, but also a constant reminder of Silas and the shame that still clung to her. She tried not to think about redemption, but the memory of Marshal Thorne's words and the townsfolk's cold stares often crept in her mind like desert dust. She still felt branded, even out here, far from judging eyes. What if Jacob, too, secretly looked down on her? What if his kindness was just pity? The shadow of her past was long, stretching all the way to this isolated cabin. One afternoon, as Emily wrestled with a stubborn fence post, her back aching, she saw Jacob watching her from distance. He quickly turned away when he realized she had noticed him. She wondered what he thought. Did he see a criminal's widow struggling? Or did he see something else? The work was hard, the loneliness a constant companion, and the whispers of shame, though internal now, were no less potent. Yet, with each task she completed, a tiny seed of strength began to sprout in her weary heart. She was providing for Lily day by day, and that was a powerful thing. The weeks turned into months, and a rhythm began to settle over Emily's days. The demanding ranch work, which had initially felt like a punishment, slowly became a source of quiet pride. Her hands, once blistered, now moved with sure competence as she tended to the small flock of sheep Jacob kept or fixed a broken fence post. Jacob, though still a man of few words, was a patient teacher. He showed her how to mix feed for the animals, how to spot a sick lamb, and how to properly stretch wire across a fence. His instructions were always clear, his presence reassuring. He never raised his voice, and his blue eyes, though often distant, held no judgment. If a rattlesnake slithered too close to the cabin, Jacob was there, rifle in hand, before Emily even had time to fully gasp. If a stray dog barked too loudly near Lily, Jacob would gently shoo it away, his broad back a silent shield. This unspoken protection, more than any words, began to chip away at Emily's fear and the lingering shame. And Lily, oh Lily, the desert air and the simple, steady routine worked wonders on the little girl. At first, she had been withdrawn, clinging to Emily's skirts. But soon, she discovered the joy of chasing chickens, her giggles echoing across the dusty yard. Jacob, in his own quiet way, had a soft spot for her. He'd leave out fresh milk for her, or sometimes carve a small wooden animal during his breaks. Lily, without the burden of town gossip, blossomed. Her small face, once clouded with confusion and sadness, now often broke into a wide, joyful smile, especially when Jacob would let her ride on his old horse for a few slow steps. Emily watched these moments, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. Lily's laughter was a balm to her wounded soul. It was a sign that life, despite everything, was still growing, still hopeful. The cabin, once just shelter, was slowly becoming a home. Jacob's steady presence was a foundation she hadn't known she needed. The memory of redemption still flickered, a distant, unwelcome ghost, but it no longer dominated her every thought. Here, on Jacob's land, with Lily's bright smiles and Jacob's silent strength, Emily found herself breathing a little easier, standing a little taller. The seasons turned, painting the desert landscape in different shades of gold and brown. Emily's days were filled with the rhythm of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the rustle of dry grass, the steady thump of her own feet as she moved between chores. Her hands, once soft, were now strong and capable. She had learned to do things she never imagined, fixing a broken trough, helping a ewe with a difficult birth, even confidently handling Jacob's old horse, Dusty. The physical work, though tiring, brought a kind of peace. Each completed task was a small victory, building a quiet strength within her. She was no longer just a woman grieving. She was a woman providing, a woman capable. The shame, which had felt like a brand, slowly began to fade, not entirely gone, but duller, less sharp. The whispers of redemption felt like a distant echo, like a dream that had happened to someone else. Here, on Jacob's land, only the wind whispered, and it carried no judgment. Jacob remained a man of few words, but his presence was a constant, solid comfort. He always ensured they had enough food, enough firewood for the cold desert nights. He never spoke of Silas, or the past, or the town's harshness. Instead, he spoke of the land, the animals, the coming rain. He taught her to read the signs of the weather, to understand the needs of the ranch. In his quiet way, he was a pillar of support, a steady hand that guided without controlling. Emily started to feel a deep sense of belonging, not to a town that had cast her out, but to this wild, beautiful place, and to the small family she was building with Lily and, in a way, with Jacob. Her laughter, once a rare and fragile thing, now came more easily, especially when Lily would recount her latest adventures with a stray kitten or a particularly noisy rooster. One afternoon, as she sat on the porch mending a torn shirt, watching Lily play in the dust with a stick and a handful of pebbles, Emily realized something profound. The heavy weight she had carried since Silas's death had lightened. She was not just surviving, she was living. She was finding joy in the simple things, in the warmth of the sun, in Lily's healthy glow, in the quiet, steady rhythm of her new life. The healing was slow, like the growth of a desert plant, but it was real. She was no longer Emily, the criminal's widow. She was simply Emily, strong and capable, finding her place in a world that had almost broken her. One evening, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the desert sky in breathtaking shades of orange and purple, Emily sat on the small porch of her cabin. Lily was already asleep inside, tired from a day of playing with the ranch dogs. Jacob had joined her, a rare occurrence. Usually, he stayed to himself after his day's work, but tonight, he sat on the top step, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The air was still, broken only by the chirping of crickets. Emily felt a comfortable, quiet settle between them, a quiet that had grown over the months, replacing the initial awkwardness. She found herself truly at peace in his presence, a feeling she hadn't known since before Silas. Jacob cleared his throat, a low, rumbling sound that pulled Emily from her thoughts. "Emily," he began, his voice softer than usual, barely a whisper against the vastness of the desert. "There's something I need to tell you." Her heart gave a small, unwelcome lurch. A familiar knot of fear tightened in her stomach. Had he grown tired of them? Was he going to send them away? Jacob turned to face her, his blue eyes holding a deep, troubled look she hadn't seen before. "It's about Silas," he said, and the name, after so long unspoken, felt like a stone dropping into a still pond, sending ripples through the quiet. Emily tensed, bracing herself for whatever harsh judgment or pity might follow. "The day Silas and his gang tried to rob the bank," Jacob continued, his voice steady but laced with a clear pain, "he had a pistol to Billy Henderson's head. Billy was just a boy, terrified. Silas was going to shoot him." Emily listened, her breath held tight in her chest. She remembered the rumors, the fear in town, but Silas had always told her he'd never hurt anyone who wasn't armed. "I was there," Jacob said, his gaze unwavering now, fixed on her. "I saw it. I had my rifle. I shot him, Emily. To stop him. To save Billy, and maybe others." The words hit Emily with the force of a physical blow. The setting sun seemed to spin around her. Jacob, the quiet, kind man who had given her shelter, who had taught her, protected her, who made Lily laugh. He was the one who had shot Silas. The man who had taken her husband's life was the same man who had saved hers. A whirlwind of emotions ripped through her. Shock, betrayal, a burning anger, and a bewildering sense of clarity. All this time, his kindness, his quiet devotion, it had been born of guilt. The world tilted on its axis. The man she had slowly come to trust, to lean on, was also the man who had shattered her life. The desert wind, which moments ago had been a comforting sigh, now felt like a cold, sharp blade. Emily stared at Jacob, the vibrant colors of the sunset blurring before her eyes. The truth, raw and brutal, hung between them. Jacob, the quiet man, the protector, the one who had brought laughter back to Lily's face. He was the reason for all her suffering. He had shot Silas. A hot wave of anger washed over her, quickly followed by a stinging hurt. How could he have kept this from her? All these months. Every kind word, every helpful gesture, now felt tainted, covered in a thick layer of deceit. Was it all just a way to ease his own conscience? You killed him. Emily's voice was barely a whisper, ragged with disbelief. And you let me. You let us live here on your land, all this time knowing. Jacob nodded, his gaze dropping to his hands, clasped tightly in front of him. I know it was wrong to keep it from you, Emily. But after the Marshal told you to leave, I saw you and Lily. You had nowhere. I couldn't just stand by. His voice was heavy with a sorrow that resonated with her own. Emily wanted to lash out, to scream at him, to make him feel the pain she felt. But looking at him, truly looking at him in that fading light, she saw more than just guilt. His shoulders were slumped, his face etched with a deep weariness. His eyes, when they met hers again, were not defiant or cold, but filled with a profound regret that mirrored the vastness of the desert sky. He had a gun to that boy's head, Emily, Jacob said again, his voice cracking slightly. You have killed him. I had no choice. She remembered the rumors about Silas, the times he'd come home agitated, his stories of deals gone bad. She had always tried to believe the best in him, but a part of her had known his life was dangerous. Silas had not been a simple man. He had made choices that put others in harm's way. And Jacob, in that moment, had made a choice to save an innocent life. The anger still simmered, but it was now mixed with a confusing understanding. He hadn't shot Silas out of malice, but out of necessity. His honesty now, though painful, was a testament to his character. He could have kept the secret forever, but he hadn't. He had faced her with the terrible truth. Emily closed her eyes, tried to sort through the tangle of feelings. The man who had taken her husband's life had also given her and Lily a new one. It was a harsh, confusing truth, but the sorrow in Jacob's eyes, the deep lines of worry on his face, spoke louder than any accusation. He wasn't just guilty. He was truly, deeply sorry for the pain he had caused, even if his actions had been righteous. She saw his struggle, his burden. It was a mirror to her own. The desert night deepened around them, the stars blazing with a cold, distant light. Emily sat silent, Jacob's confession echoing in her mind. The initial shock and hurt slowly began to give way to a different kind of understanding. She thought of that terrible day in Redemption, the Marshal's harsh words, the town's closed doors. She thought of the cold, hungry night she and Lily had faced, utterly alone. And then Jacob had appeared. He hadn't judged her. He hadn't turned her away. He had offered a roof, food, and a chance to rebuild. He had given Lily a safe place to laugh and grow. And he had given Emily a purpose, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. He had saved them. Even if his actions had set in motion the chain of events that led to her despair, his subsequent kindness had pulled her back from the brink. She looked at Jacob, still hunched, his face shadowed with regret. He was not a cruel man. He was a man who had made a difficult choice, a necessary choice, to protect others. And then, burdened by the unintended consequences, he had tried to mend what he could, quietly, without seeking praise. His honesty now, despite the pain it caused, showed a courage she respected. Emily took a deep breath, the desert air cool in her lungs. "You saved us, Jacob," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You gave us a home when no one else would. You protected Lily." Jacob finally looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Yes, you hurt me," Emily continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But Silas made his own choices. And you made a choice to save innocent lives." She paused, the full weight of her decision settling upon her. "I can't undo what happened, but I can choose what happens now." She thought of Lily, sleeping soundly in the cabin. She thought of the quiet life they had built, the strength she had found. To leave now, to run from this truth, would be to abandon the peace she had fought so hard to find. "I'll stay, Jacob," she said, her voice gaining strength. "We'll stay." She looked at him, truly seeing him, a man broken by his past, just as she had been. "We can heal, Jacob, together." A flicker of relief, so profound it almost made him sag, crossed Jacob's face. He nodded, a single, silent acknowledgement. The sun had finally set, and the first true stars of night began to emerge, bright and clear. The desert was still vast, and life would still be hard, but now, Emily knew she wouldn't face it alone. She and Jacob, two broken souls, had found a way to begin again, to build a future out of the dust and the truth.